So live stream is now on.
Thank you.
Muting all, and I'm starting the recording. And now over to you. Sorry, Your Worship, you just need to unmute yourself.
Welcome everybody to the full council meeting, 24th March 2022. Deputy Mayor Holbrook, would you kindly do the council blessing?
Ia mātou e whiriwhiri ana, ina take ke moe i o mātou aroaro. E puna ana mātou ke kaha tonu ki te whakapau mahara huapai, mona hapori e mahi na mātou. Me kaha hoki mātou katoa ki a whaihua, ki a tōtiketa mātou mahi, a matamaia te tira whakamua me te hihiri kataia te arahi I roto I te kutaitanga me te aroha.
Thank you very much. Item number 3, apologies. Tanika, have you got any apologies? No.
We have apologies from Community Board Chair James Westbury and Community Board Chair Christine Paps. And so we have Richard Mansell in for the Waikanae Community Board and Cam Butler for Otaki Community Board.
So can I move that the apologies be accepted? Can I have a seconder for that?
I think that's Councillor Holbrook.
Councillor Holbrook, all those in favour say aye. Make it mark. I'm getting a bit of trouble.
Your Worship, we have 10 votes in favour.
Right. Thank you very much. That's carried. Item number 4, declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda. I have not been notified of any. Okay. Item number 5 and item number 6, yes, no business there. We go straight into item number 7, public speaking time for items relating to the agenda. The first speaker, Pat Twignan, and then we've got another one, Salima Padamsi, both on the issue of the draft intensification plan change. Pat is speaking, he's a member of the Waikanae Beach Residents Society by speaking on his personal capacity, so he will have 3 minutes. Salima Padamsi, as chair of crew, is speaking on behalf of the organization. She'll have 5 minutes. Pat, do you want to start first?
Thank you. I needed to be unmuted by your person. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Before you start, you've got 3 minutes.
Indeed.
And
Understand.
before the 3 minutes up, I might just prompt you to wind up.
Sure.
There you go. Welcome.
Thank you. To be to the point, my submission is that it is important the document released for consultation regarding PC2 explains in some fuller detail what is meant in paragraphs 55 and 56, which refer, in the case of the Waikanae Beach precinct, to the land form being a consideration. And I appreciate that this is a step that probably in a minor way, but attempts to preserve the one aspect of the character that was agreed to be appropriate for Waikanae Beach. So that was my main request, that reference be clarified. It's not a criticism of the officer, but just that it's very succinct and not easily understood by submitters. I'd just like to briefly acknowledge, Your Worship the Mayor, that you summed up my comments at the last meeting very precisely, and I appreciate that. I would also like to say to the Chief Executive that in as much as he used a metaphor that myself and others were wanting to drive faster than the speed limit. I think the appropriate metaphor is that we would like a slow lane to be preserved. We are not looking to go fast. We were hoping to preserve a character from the past. So I think that's the appropriate metaphor for us. Finally, I would ask that you clarify the timetable, in particular when you expect to aim to complete the draft consultation. I know it's 1 month, but then when would you expect that the independent panel that is required by the Act, as I understand it, to be appointed, just so we could understand for what the future holds? Thank you.
Are you done? Mr. Dugnan, you're finished.
Yes, that is my submission at this point. My colleague Glenn Wiggs, who is, I think, speaking on behalf of the Society, will be elaborating on the Jacobs report issue and why the application of inundation concerns is confined to such a narrow piece of the coast rather than a wider area.
So are you now open for questions?
Yes, right.
I've got Councillor Compton, then Councillor Pravanna.
Kia ora. Through the chair, thank you, Pat, for that. My question is, in your comments there, you talked about wanting a slow lane and wanting to preserve Waikanae Beach's past character from the past. Why do you think that's fair that Waikanae Beach gets some sort of carve out and the rest of the district doesn't have any character that's worth preserving? Why is Waikanae Beach's privilege worth preserving over everyone else's?
Yes, thank you very much. In your own district plan, there's an appendix, which I think is Appendix 3, and that talks about the beach residential zones. And to roughly quote, but you can read the precise words, it states that the beach residential zones, or rather the beach character, is an asset for the entire Wellington area. And I believe that to be the essential issue, that both Raumati, Waikanae Beach and Paikok are assets for the Wellington area as they stand in their sort of a relaxed beach atmosphere. What now is threatening to eventually happen is that the coast of Kapiti will look like the coast of the Golden Coast outside Brisbane, multi-storey buildings along the rim of it, blocking out the views and changing the whole character. That's my reasoning. And that, I believe, is a real consideration. It's not just the residents, it's actually the entire area that is the Wellington region. People will end up, I suspect, having to go to Levin and try to find beaches such as Wairere and so on.
So how would you propose to then resolve housing affordability in Waikanae Beach? Or is it your view that it should be allowed to become an exclusive, expensive enclave?
It's like more expensive, literally, in terms of land values as a result of the application. I do understand that, you know, the central government have made a law and you don't have a lot of room for manoeuvre. The answer to your question, though, would be, to be precise, actually, in some ways, that you designated the Oldie Beach area as being very special. That was after a long consideration, and it was supported by a lot of documentation. So in some ways, that would be the area that is essential to Terry Street. All of that atmosphere is likely to be devastated ultimately by the MDRS 3 stories. I do note that you are preserving your options regarding the literal waterfront rim just for a few streets. And I hope you can preserve that, but even that is under threat. And it's the result threatens ultimately, I know over a long period, to be that Waikanae and other areas look like the Gold Coast of Australia. And we know what that looks like, multi-story buildings right along the rim and everywhere else sort of very not, uninteresting.
Are you aware that the Gold Coast, those multi-story buildings there are actually high rises right up to the beachfront? But what's proposed in this would be that the MDRS is 3 stories. That's hardly multi-story, would you agree?
Well, I think that if you have 3 stories throughout the entire area, I actually be correct. You have reserved your position regarding the literal waterfront. I mean, if you have 3-story buildings along the ridge of the Perry Street,
Pat, I think we're losing you.
can you hear me now? Can you hear me okay?
I think it's just your connection, Mr. Doynan.
Computer voice now?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, it must just be my headphones. I'll be quick. If you have 3-story buildings along the literal waterfront, it will completely destroy the atmosphere. You have reserved your position regarding that in this proposal. Nevertheless, if you have 3-story buildings starting just 1 street in or 2 streets in, it too will devastate the sense of this as a area where people come to relax. And I realise the constraints you face from central government, but it is appalling really what is going to potentially happen.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Ravano.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Pat, for coming along and speaking today. So I have a number of questions. So is it correct that Waikanae Beach, there's actually 2 implications here. One is that you're going to have, you've got this residential intensification precinct, so that when you hit Waikanae Beach, you go from a rural area and then potentially going to be hit with 4-story buildings. Is that correct?
3-story, I think.
I think actually just around, the old garage and dairies, I think that actually potentially is 4.
Yes, that's true. But that is sort of locked in by the Act. Yes. Indeed was locked in before the December amendments, that the local zone and walkable area must be in effect more intensified than the area around it. I mean, that's the way the law's written.
I know. But I'm going to say it's going to, and I think when you look at the beach bylaw, I suppose, document, it's very clear in there that there was a need, I suppose, to have a nice entrance into Waikanae Beach, and I'm not quite sure whether 4-story buildings are going to do that. But anyway, that's by the by. So my next question relates to these beach residential zones. So obviously, Waikanae Beach was the most recent one done, and then Raumati, Paikokariki and Otaki Beach were also done. Is it fair to say that for some reason, why do you think only residents of Waikanae Beach are actually raising this issue, whereas these other areas also have these residential beach zones?
I think the brief answer is that the people of Paikokariki do not understand that a 6-story zone, I believe it is it 5 or 6, but one or the other, because they are a transport hub. And this is just not your fault, but just this act was only passed in December, and people don't understand its implications, although they will start to. I think that the Paikokariki case warrants the Commission writing to the Select Committee and saying this is surely bizarre. I do think in both the case of Te Horo and Paikokariki, I'm a little surprised Mr. Andrew Hazelton obtained from the Department of the Environment the advice to the Select Committee, which actually explicitly thought or suggested that Te Horo would be an area, and Paikokariki, where you would avail yourself of this clause about areas that have less than 5,000 residents and are not intended to be part of a bigger urban area. And I must say, I don't understand why that has not been availed of in this matter. I understand the argument about Waikanae is more difficult to get it across the line, but I would have thought Te Horo certainly, and Paikokariki is in fact a demonstration of just how this act as passed is dysfunctional, because it is a transport hub. But the idea, I mean, I think if you got a few articles and papers, even the government might balk at the idea that Paikokariki is going to have 5 or 6 story buildings.
Thank you. So my other question too relates to section 77IJ in the Amendment Act, and so it talks about factors that are that can be that basically exclude or that exempt these areas, and one of the areas that it talks about in J is about doing an evaluation under policy 3, which has actually been done for Waikanae Beach. So based on that, do you think it actually qualifies to be exempt?
I'd like to think so. You have legal advice, and to be fair to your staff, they have said that the legal advice says that can't be made to work. Andrew Hazelton sought further information, but it's all redacted on the basis of legal privilege. There's not a criticism. I kind of understand what's happening, but you are entitled to look at that legal advice, and that is the basis on which the matter's been argued by your staff, doing their best, no criticism. I think that, you should be able to quiz quite closely as to whether that is too narrow a interpretation, and that the lawyers, as sometimes they do, have seen it as being that the council should go full steam ahead, and so they're really putting up arguments as to why you can't use that clause, rather than exploring fully whether you could. That's pretty unfair to criticise legal advice I can't see, but that's in sense it could be happening.
Thank you very much.
Right, Councillor Randall.
Yeah. Thank you, Pat. Firstly, Pat, your surname is Dignan, isn't it?
That's me. Oh, yes.
Everyone's wrong, eh?
Yeah, it's spelled correctly.
Okay. In relationship to the special rights or special character of Waikanae Beach and the garden precedent, your view is the council should perhaps look at other areas first and make a transition to Waikanai Beach at some time in the future for a special character status and retain the special character status of the Waikanai Beach and the Waikanai Garden precedent?
Ideally, yes. I should, though, say that, you know, I submitted to the select committee and I read the act, and I do recognise the difficulties that the, you know, central government bulldozer is making for you, and your staff are trying to get you so that you don't get overruled. And unfortunately, we all have to recognise that there's this process at the end of the exercise where your decisions will be taken to an independent panel. And whereas those panels are normally thought of as completely independent, this one, to be blunt, is the government's agent to see whether you have done what they feel the act requires. And it's very draconian because the panel makes its recommendations, and so they can sort of shout you down, and then it goes to the minister, who has an absolute decision without right of appeal to the Environment Court, although you could appeal against it for judicial review. So I mean, it's sad that I would like to think it could be done, and I may sound as if I'm arguing against myself, but I'm just being realistic and making sure I don't set you up in a way that you know, is not the legal situation. But I do think that you should study the legal advice and see whether it is possible for you to apply the special conditions required to exempt areas.
Yeah. So Pat, I don't know if you're aware, Margaret Stevenson wrote an interesting letter in the Capital News, and she talks about the Building Act of 2004. That was introduced, it was a law, but it created basically a mess as far as housing went, as far as the standard of housing. So I'm wondering, because the government passes a law, or two government, if you like, and the opposition supports it, whether it justifies us proceeding along this path truthfully, or can we deviate? Can we find ways to deviate from what the council, what the government is proposing?
I kind of really have to hesitate. I'd like to say yes, but I don't want to purport to sort of, you know, be a bush lawyer here. So I think that you are entitled and should explore your options. I also think actually there is a case for other councils for you to communicate with them. Kapiti is somewhat ahead in the timetable as far as I can tell. I don't think many, if any, have yet produced their equivalent of PC2. They will have to. I do think that there could be an argument for you as a council to ask the staff to talk to other councils that are affected, particularly, for example, the Auckland councils north of Auckland on the beaches, about what they are doing, because they face the same problem, you know, Snell's Beach with 3-story buildings.
Right.
So that's that. Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Randall, you finished with this? Thank you very much. Councillor McCann.
Robert, Pat, thank you very much for coming and talking to us. I've got a number of questions. And my first one is, how does special characteristics house anyone?
Well, as I indicated earlier, the special character doesn't. I mean, it is clearly that the special character is a relaxed, non-strict sort of, super intense atmosphere. I understand your point that we need more houses in New Zealand. It's a question that this is a absolute blanket, one size fits all, and that where you can, I believe that you can discharge our obligations to accommodate growth without requiring that Terry Street has 3-story buildings and more, and 3 of them in each lot.
To explore that, Pat, if you agree that not everyone wants a 3-story building next to them, and we start to carve out exceptions, don't you think that if we created an exception and didn't follow the direction of the government, that every part of our community would go, oh, well, there is a housing crisis, but I don't want to build next to me?
Well,
do you not see that flow-on effect?
I can, but that's an argument that you could apply anywhere, and an argument that says that only total uniformity, total deregulation and let it rip everywhere, because if you sort of preserve, in a sense, the character of one area, every other will complain. That's a recipe for an extreme outcome, it seems to me. You have identified over years 3 beach residential areas, or 4, I suppose, because there's a tacky one too. And you had gone to the trouble of having sort of specific requirements for them. So there's nothing incompatible with that. Parts of Paraparaumu main area, people almost certainly are very happy with multi-storey buildings, but not
Pat,
everywhere.
To ask you that question again, what's changed is that we now have a housing crisis where we've got people living in garages, sleeping on couches. We've got many families who can't find rental accommodation. We've got many families who can't buy a first home. And it's quite clear that this legislation that you're asking us not to follow, I might add, you're asking us to go against the legislation that has been enacted by the government. If that has changed, and therefore some of the rules around our communities have to change, such as special character. Otherwise, we simply can't house people.
Well, can I just answer that this way? The Government's Act was based upon a study by PwC, a cost-benefit analysis. And in that, they talked about special character. They said that the difference between preserving special character zones in Auckland and not doing so was that you reduced the supply by the additional supply by 1%, right? 1%. And I would believe that actually, if that was applied to the Wellington area, there are only very limited special character zones in the entire Wellington area. Most councils don't have them. In fact, I don't think Hutt has any. It may have one at Eastbourne. So I think that your argument is pushing it to an extreme, that it would be perfectly compatible to resolve the housing crisis. There's a huge area that will be MDRS independent of this particular decision. But and I do argue that you would be preserving, if you could, the character of Wellington area's beaches. Ironically, the beaches that are accessible by the expressway, and instead now the only areas that will have those beaches are going to be further north. I do think you should preserve Te Horo. The Department of the Environment envisaged you would.
Thank you for letting me ask those questions, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hendrick.
Yeah, kia ora, thank you. And thank you, Pat, for being with us and for sticking around to answer all of our questions. Really appreciate it. Have gained some great insight and depth into your perspective on this. So it's, yeah, much appreciated. You've talked a lot about how any form of intensification would devastate the nature of Waikanae Beach's current special character. So I'm keen to hear your thoughts on, though, what change means. Like why there seems to be this huge difference between something being absolutely devastated and actually something just evolving and changing with the current situation and context, because it does have to, as Councillor McCann has mentioned, because there's a housing crisis. And just to tag onto that so I don't have to unmute myself again, how do we recognise that people being housed in our community is actually going to make Kapiti more special because we won't have people who are homeless? And I, for one, think that that's kind of what's going to make Kapiti, all in all, a better place for everyone and a better place for even visitors coming from outside of Kapiti to experience the district, to actually not have people, as Councillor McCann was saying, living in cars, living in garages, young people couch surfing. I, for one, think that that's what's going to make Kapiti more special.
Well, I agree that we want to eliminate people living, the need for people to live in cars. And I think that is imperative. And I think that we've had major problems in New Zealand, partly because we let the population grow through immigration at an extraordinary rate, the highest in the world for a couple of years in the world other than Africa. But that, as I just mentioned, the special preservation of these special character areas was suggested that detracted by 1%, 1 in 100. You get 1 in 100 less houses as a result. Now, that is not, I suggest, too high a price to pay for preserving the character, for example, of Paikok, which you represent. I mean, I can't imagine how the residents are going to feel when they discover, as they won't have yet, that they're going to be allowed to have 3 dwellings per section and up to, I think, 6 stories because of the transport hub. What we sadly face is that this piece of legislation, well-meaning, but it's a one-size-fits-all. I'm supportive of much of what this government does, but I feel in this case, and also actually in the water case, they have drifted into a one-size-fits-all situation, which we will all live to regret. I do feel that it's not correct to cast this as, if you want to carve out any area that you have no concern for the homeless. I certainly am not in that school, and I work in various ways to assist in that area.
Right. There are no other questions. Thank you very much, Pat. There's been
thank you very much for the time, and I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bye.
Our next public speaking time speaker is Salima Padamsi for Crew.
Hi there, Salima, are you ready to present?
Yep. Can Salima come in?
She's here. Salima, can you hear us? Ms. Pedempsey, I might have to ask you to leave the meeting and come back in again. It seems like you might be having some technical issues. Your Worship, if we could just take a few moments just to wait for Ms. Pedempsey to reset herself.
Okay. Anybody want to take a very quick break?
Okay, I'm just admitting her again now. How's that now?
Nothing's happening.
No, I don't think. When you've come in, Miss Pedempsey, have you been able to connect your audio to your Zoom account? I'm not sure how you want to proceed here now, Mr. Mayor. I can, if you wanted, I'm not sure if you wanted to carry on, and I can try and call Miss Pedempsey and see how we can get her to.
Yeah, I think we'll just continue, and then we'll see if we can fit her in at some stage when she's ready. But I don't be able to. I don't. The other business that we've started to be stopped. Certainly, that's no good either.
Do you want to take a 5-minute break then, so I can give her a phone call? And
yeah, I think that'll be useful.
Okay.
Break. 10:15. We're back.